Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here, whether you are here via Zoom or here via the rainy outdoor weather that it took to get to the backside of the University Center. We appreciate everyone for being here, no matter how they chose to attend. I'm officially calling this meeting to order. This is the second full faculty meeting of the academic year. And you have been sent the minutes and the agenda, and we will now entertain a motion to approve the minutes. So moved. Thank you. Do we have a second to approve the minutes? All right. No
Second.
Required for minutes.
This is Joni.
Are thusly approved. All right. We will move right on into our administrative reports. Chancellor Dooley, we have you up first. Yes, you may. But you must use this microphone.
I can do. Yeah, thank you. Happy to be with you this afternoon. Good to see a few people here. Awful rainy, wet day. I really appreciate being put on the agenda first. I was supposed to go to Nashville this afternoon for the UT Day on the Hill tomorrow, but I'm now leaving in the morning. But since I was on the agenda first, I'm like, that's fine. You can just leave me on the agenda first. So anyway, a couple of updates. One is I want to remind everybody about the Gallup survey that went out. This is the civility survey and the perspectives, diversity of perspectives on campus. That survey will stay open until February 24th. Please go back through your emails and see if you can find it. I think if you Google Gallup, you'll find it. Maybe look in your deleted emails. Sometimes I just randomly delete stuff that I don't know what it is. That's actually, I won't say it where I found mine, was in my deleted email. Anyway, but please fill that out. We're going to be reaching out to students, so we'll be sending out some reminders. But this is a survey that goes out across the system. It's really short. It'll take you literally about a minute and a half to fill it out, but it's just asking you if you feel comfortable sharing diverse perspectives on campus. And the system looks at these response rates across our campuses, and we want to have a good showing. So please do that. Let me give you a quick strategic plan update. I think 2 weeks ago, email went out from me asking you to take a look at some revisions to the mission and vision statement that the executive leadership team had taken a look at and said looks good. The response on that was over 80% of the faculty and staff across campus thought those vision and mission statements looked good. So it's either agree or strongly agree. I don't think we're going to get much better than that, to be honest with you. You're never going to get 100% consensus. So we're going to move forward. We're starting to work on goals, which will go out to faculty and staff as well. We will have a listening session around the goals and the mission and vision and the values prior to spring break, and then there'll be a couple of additional ones after spring break in April. So there's going to be additional opportunities, additional surveys to weigh in. But I feel good about where the strategic plan is headed. We will take that to the Board of Trustees in June for their approval. I again want to thank Vice Chancellor Farnsworth, because she's really the one that laid the groundwork for us to be able to do this work and all the work she did last year leading the plan. So I appreciate that. I'm going to put a plug in for my Rollins College of Business. March 3rd, we're breaking ground on the new building at 10:30 in the morning. It should be an exciting celebratory day. Hopefully it won't be like this, but if you're on this end of campus or on that end of campus around 10:30, please drop by the groundbreaking. It's going to be a pretty exciting day. We're excited about that. Chancellor search, and then I'm going to give you a quick enrollment update. Chancellor search is well underway. They've been receiving applications. I'm not exactly sure when the review of applications start. It may have already started. March 4th will be the review of applications, so we're getting less than a month out. The goal is to do initial interviews in March and have candidates on campus in April and have somebody hired by the fall of 25, of this semester. Yes. There is someone from Cass on it. Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't go out. So Dr. Chris Cunningham is serving. Yeah, Dr. Chris Cunningham is serving from Cass. And so I appreciate you asking that question from Coffee with the Chancellor, because that's what prompted us to ask somebody to ask if we could have somebody from Cass. And I think it makes a lot of sense too. Dr. Cunningham is in charge of total organizational health. So there's a lot of reasons that he was a good selection for that. So that's moving forward. And then lastly, let me give you some enrollment numbers to give you an idea where we are. Everything looks pretty good except for freshman housing, and we're still trying to get a handle on why that's the case. But if you look at year to date, freshman housing applications, we're down 17% year to date from this time last year. We're not really sure why. I think some of it has to do with the financial situation in terms of cost of housing in general. We think some of it may have to do with an increase in the number of applicants from our 50-mile radius where students do not have to live on campus. But we're looking into that. It's improved somewhat from a few weeks ago. We were down by about 25%. So it also could just be a timing issue with people. But we're up 7% overall in freshman applications from 2023, for housing. But last year was just a record year for housing freshmen. But we're up from 2023. Transfers, applications for housing are down 34% from last year. We are still, I don't want to say struggling, but transfer students are still a challenge for us, both in terms of recruiting them into UTC. And we're looking at that in our enrollment efforts within the ELT level. Overall, housing is up. If you take everybody, returning students, freshmen, and transfers, we're up 5% overall from last year. So those are all good signs. I suspect we will have full 100% occupancy this coming fall with our housing. Related to housing, the dorm for where Frist Hall sits is still scheduled for 2027, although Vice Chancellor Goldberg may have an update on that, but I think it's still on track as far as we know, right? As far as we know. Applications. So we're up 15% in freshman applications from this time last year. We have 14,107 freshman applications. We're down 10% in transfers. Again, that seems to be a challenge for us. We have 862 transfer applications at this point. Acceptances are up 12%. We've accepted 8,139 freshmen. Transfer acceptances are down 10%. So again, transfers down at 309%. Probably the best indicator of where we are for freshman class are registrations to date. So these are students that have accepted and signed up for an orientation registration on campus already. And we're up 84% year to date. So those are students that have committed to come and have already registered to come to an orientation at UTC. So I think that's a really positive sign. So things are looking good. We have a target of 12,000 students for enrollment for this fall. That's to stay on track for the 14,800 number that we've been given by system by 2030. So that's trending in the right direction. So on the whole, I think things are looking good. Again, the concern, if I have a concern, it's about what the retention number is going to look like. And I know Dr. Crawford's going to talk about that in a few minutes, but I really want to thank the faculty and the Faculty Senate for taking on retention and forming a committee, a faculty committee to look at retention, because it's going to be critically important going forward. So with that, I'll entertain any questions.
If you have questions from the Zoom, you can feel free to break in and ask your question, or you can type your question in the chat and we will have someone read it to the chancellor.
We up here? No questions? All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Provost Hale, you're up next. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you to all of you who braved this wonderful weather to be here in person. Those of you who are not, you're going to be missing out on some good cookies and stuff to drink out in the other room. I wanted to briefly address 3 issues and then take up any questions that you might have. The first of the issues has to do with transitions that will be happening in academic affairs. If you have not sent an email to Lauren Ingram lately, then you would have missed her away message. She has an away message up indicating that she will be on leave for the foreseeable future. And during that period of time, I wanted to let you know that Associate Provost and Dean of the Graduate School, Ethan Carver, will be available and taking up many of the things that were in the faculty affairs portfolio that Lauren was dealing with. So if you have RTP questions, or if we're also entering the EDO time of the year. So if you have EDO questions, please direct those to Dean Carver for the foreseeable future. And then the other transition that I can tell you about right now related to Lauren's portfolio is that our university registrar, Joel Wells, will be moderating the faculty listserv in Lauren's absence. And so if you have things that are going to go out via the listserv, if you can route them to Joel, and we'll send out an announcement to the campus about those two things as well. Lauren had some other responsibilities that she was taking care of for academic affairs too. She was the academic affairs representative to some faculty senate committees. We don't have those exactly squared away yet, but as we know who those representatives are, I'll be communicating that information to President Crawford, and it will be available to you as well. You heard Chancellor Dooley briefly mention retention efforts, and if you've either been to the initial coffee that he gave or heard him in some other public settings, when he took on the role of interim chancellor, there were three priorities that were conveyed to him. One related to the strategic plan, which he addressed earlier. The second one was related to our enrollments and the enrollment targets that were set. Our enrollment target for the upcoming year is slightly more than 12,000 students, and it will be the biggest enrollment that the university has ever had if we attain that target and that goal, and I think we will. And the third one has to do with retention. And so I wanted to tell you about some retention efforts and to clear up some confusion surrounding one. You heard the chancellor, and you will hear your faculty senate president a bit later talk about a faculty senate committee with faculty members who will be addressing the retention issue. Part of my background is in the study of group dynamics. And in the group dynamics literature, one of the techniques that's frequently used is a parallel groups technique, where you have multiple groups addressing the same issue. And we're going to be trying to attack the retention issue using parallel groups or multiple groups, because generally what happens when you use that technique, it generates more ideas than would be generated if you had a single group, even if the single group had more group members. And so right now there has been a task force that's been working for several years on a variety of retention issues, some of them addressing transfer students and some other things, that has been convened by Sherry Marlowe Ormsby. And then in addition to the Faculty Senate Committee that Dr. Crawford will talk to you about, there will also be an academic affairs task force that's going to be convened, and Dr. Rebecca Shortridge, and if you don't know Dr. Shortridge, she is the department head in accounting, and she'll be taking on that task. And there is method to the madness of having three groups addressing the same issue. And if you do get an email from Dr. Shortridge asking for your participation, I hope you'll give it serious thought, because it is a priority and something that we badly need to address. I mentioned to the Faculty Senate at their last meeting, and if you missed it for the full faculty, let me just tell you why it's a priority for us. In 2020, our first to second year retention rate on campus was 76.7%. It fell in 2023 to 74.3% and fell again from fall of 2023 to fall of 2024 to 71.9%. So we're headed a bit in the wrong direction and want to get that turned around. The easiest way for us to meet enrollment targets that we have is to lose fewer students first to second year and to have them come back. And so that's the reason that is an ongoing priority for us. In addition to that, Academic Affairs Task Force, we have also agreed, and Vice Chancellor Farnsworth is helping with this, in addition to Victoria Bryan in the Walker Center for Teaching and Learning, a rollout of an early alert system, which is called Dropout Detective. We think that it will give us earlier alert and more complete alert than just looking at midterm grades for students. And we're rolling it out as a pilot. So it will be rolled out initially, I think, for 600 students. And one of the things that Dropout Detective will tell us for those 600 students that are part of the pilot is whether they are actually accessing the materials that are in the Canvas course shells for the courses that you may be teaching. And if they are not, it will alert us very early on so that we can follow up with those students and try to reach them before they have hit a point of no return where they can't recover from a bad start. And then a third thing that we know that we're going to do, I have talked to some department heads and we'll be talking to others. There are a variety of bridge programs that we have, mostly summer bridge programs. The ones that we're probably most familiar with are the ones related to mathematics. And we're having conversations about whether or not it is possible to scale up those bridge programs for students who may need a little bit of help during the summer before they matriculate and begin fall classes. The last thing that I wanted to talk to you about before I take any questions that you have are ongoing challenges that we're going to have over the next few years with regard to classroom availability and how it may affect scheduling. So let me give you a little bit of information, compliments of the Office of the Registrar. As I mentioned earlier, our goal is to be slightly larger than 12,000 students for the fall of 2025. And the fall semester always includes more classes, always includes more course sections than are offered in the spring semester. Here is the current classroom inventory, and don't see a lot of people taking notes, and I wouldn't be either. So I will pass this along to the Council of Academic Department Heads as well, so that they will have this information. But the current classroom inventory, and this is for general purpose classrooms, ones that do not include priority for particular departments. Those include 6 general purpose rooms with a capacity of greater than 100, 5 general purpose rooms with a capacity greater than 60 and not exceeding 100, 37 general purpose classrooms with a capacity between 40 and 59 seats, and 32 general purpose rooms with a capacity of 20 to 39 seats, and then a few miscellaneous rooms, computer labs, or other non-standard rooms that can be used. That's not a lot of classroom availability for departments that don't have priority for particular classroom spaces. It's unlikely that rooms are going to be open during peak times. And so if your college or department has priority access to classrooms, it's best to schedule within those spaces and not to expect rooms in other buildings to be available. The registrar and his staff will work with colleges and departments as very best they can to ensure that the effects are distributed and not concentrated on any one department. But all of that is to say, as the slide indicates, that we really need for departments to think about non-peak scheduling. We have a tendency, and I'll show my age for a second, we have a tendency to do most of our scheduling during bankers' hours, and back when banks didn't have 24-hour ATMs and things like that. Essentially, banks opened at 10 and closed at 2, and they closed at 2 in the afternoon so they could do all the paperwork and be ready to open the next day. We've fallen into a pattern on campus where when we have the rooms available, it is people's preference to teach 2 days a week instead of 3 or more, and to teach between the hours of 10 and 2. And I want to give you an early alert that's likely to become much more difficult over the next few years until some of our capital projects are finished up and additional classroom spaces come online. If you are not an early morning person, I hope that you will become a late in the afternoon or in the early evening person instead. And if you are an early morning person, please convey that to your department head or whomever is doing the scheduling for your department, because we're really going to need to schedule across all of the available class times and sessions. And those are the items that I had in mind to report to you. I'd be happy to answer questions about those things or anything else that might be on your mind. I'm not sure that I'm the right person to answer that question.
Can I
Brent?
just pose the question and then you want to answer it during your remarks. So the question is about the new staff senate. That actually is something that Vice Chancellor Goldberg can speak to, and he's next up on the agenda. So if we can hold that answer for you, we will get it answered very shortly.
Outstanding. Other questions? Yeah.
I was wondering, in terms of the conversation around retention, there is part of that conversation also focusing on retention of faculty. We've had a rough time in CAS and some of the other. Thank you. We've had a kind of a rough time in CAS recently in terms of holding on to faculty. We've had a number of departures, and that obviously has a pretty huge effect on retaining students, right? Students develop relationships with faculty. Students come back in part to work with faculty that they are familiar with, that they have connections to. And so I'm wondering how much retaining faculty is being considered as a central piece of the student retention puzzle.
As faculty members have communicated to us that they have an offer from another university, I think most of the deans and I have tried to make retention offers when those faculty members want one. They don't always, and sometimes they don't give us enough notice to be able to put together the package. Someone will communicate to my office, for example, on a Friday that they're interested in a retention offer, but they have to let the other university know on a Monday, the following Monday. That makes it really difficult. There are some other things, though, that are in the offing, and I think Vice Chancellor Goldberg will address those as well when he addresses some budget issues about what we're trying to do with faculty salaries, more generally speaking. So we are trying to be sensitive to those issues, and we are sometimes more successful than we are others. But you're right, it's something that we need to pay attention to.
What is the timeline when we can expect some more of these classrooms to come online and this sort of classroom crunch to start to alleviate?
The thing that I love about this is my colleague, Vice Chancellor Goldberg, will also be addressing that issue. So I can smile and say, hang on about 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds more, and you'll have an answer to that one as well.
I think those groups need to look at the impact of core classes being offered primarily in bankers' hours on students being able to graduate on time and potentially transferring out. And that is from Sarah, and I'm sorry, Sarah, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Kanatsi?
Okay. And Sarah, when those groups are convened, I hope that you will provide that information directly to the committees and the task forces that have been formed, because I think that's exactly the sort of feedback that they'll be looking for.
Any other questions for the provost?
Appreciate it. Thank you. The numbers on retention that you shared as they've been declining over the last few years are certainly seem to point in a negative direction, that we're trending down. I'm wondering if you can speak to how that, I guess, what the actual number is in terms. So if our admission numbers have been going up over that period, are we actually retaining the same number of people even though the percentage is going down? Is there a conversation about how many students we're admitting and the capacity to support that increased number of admissions and how that might be affecting the retention numbers as well?
I don't think we're going to have any trouble supporting 12,000. And it's one of the things that I'll be talking with the Council of Academic Department Heads about tomorrow afternoon. I've been invited to that meeting. As the campus continues to grow, we're obviously landlocked to a certain degree. And for us to meet the overall goal that President Boyd has set for the campus by 2030, the only way we're going to be able to do that, we're not going to be able to do it in all face-to-face classes with 18 to 22-year-olds, which is the bread and butter for the campus currently. We're going to have to think more creatively than that and offer more online courses, more online degree programs. And so we're going to have very serious conversations about that. I don't know if I can tell you the exact number of students that have departed. And Robert, I'm not sure if you recall that off the top of your head either. There is a net loss in students. And again, the real challenge is that for all of those students who leave, it means that the admissions team and the IMSA team have to work that much harder because they're not only trying to grow enrollments naturally, but then they've got to make up for those students that we are losing as well. And one of the things that we've had a lot of conversations about recently is that many of the students that we have been unable to retain for whatever reason are students who are, at least at first glance, quite academically capable when they get to us. We know that 6 of them, I think,
You
were
want that
students,
now? Do you want some
grade point
ramen?
averages, I think at 3.4 and scores of 25 or higher. And so we're not just losing students who were academically underprepared, we're losing some very good students too, and we're trying to get a handle on that. And while I'm doing that, I should probably also give a shout out to our colleagues in OPIR because they have provided us with some really excellent data that are allowing us to do a deeper dive into figuring out why students are leaving and predictors for students that we are most likely to lose along the way. That's not exactly an answer to the question that you asked, but I don't have the specific numbers to be able to provide to you. I'd be happy to follow up with you about it, though.
Other questions for Provost Hale, either via Zoom or here in the room? All right, that brings us to Vice Chancellor Goldberg. Just take a microphone from anybody, sir.
Thank you. All right, first question, I'm going to do some answers first for questions. So Staff Senate was the first one. So we have approved bylaws for Staff Senate. They were loosely based on Faculty Senate bylaws. UT Health Science Center established a Staff Senate before we did, so we also used their bylaws as a guide. But we do have fully approved Staff Senate bylaws. The goal is to have a Staff Senate on all UT campuses. A UT Senate or UT system said that their preference was to move away from the committees that we have currently, which is the Exempt Staff Council and the Employee Relations Council, which is primarily non-exempt. So combining all that into a Staff Senate would have a representation or representing body for staff, just like Faculty Senate has. So the bylaws are approved. We've worked out some logistics, and I think we are just waiting for elections to happen. Lori, does that sound right? That's pretty much where we are. So we're ready to launch the Staff Senate and have it be active. So I think that'll be really beneficial for our staff across campus. I think it will help give them a little more of a voice and more of a platform to do things, much like you all have. What was the other question? How long are these classrooms going to be offline? I think was one. It's at least 2 years. So this is going to be a problem for at least the next 2 years for the most part. We'll have a little bit of reprieve in a year with Brock Hall coming back online, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but we're generally looking at 2 years of growing pains from now. And speaking of that, so I'll talk about some capital projects first. We have $450 million in active capital projects. One is actually completed, the Wofford Center addition at the arena. That one's been completed. We just have to close it out. That was a $35 million project. Hall is still in progress. The current timeline for Brock is to finish construction April of 2026. I know that one's taken a very long time. There's been lots of issues along the way, various things from inside the building to contracts and everything in between. But we feel pretty good that one will be done by April of 26, and then we can move people back in during the summer. And then that will be fully online for fall of 26. So that will give us, I think there's quite a bit of classroom space in that building that will help in a year. We have this UC renovation. This is a $38 million renovation in this building. We're currently projecting to be done by October of 2026. I think that'll probably go past that a little bit, just knowing how these things go. It's 6 phases because we've We're doing it in phases to keep this building open for students as much as possible during the next couple of years. Then we have the 540 Macaulay renovation. That's a $40 million renovation that starts in March. That one is scheduled to be done by December of 26. We have the new health sciences building that also starts in March. And that's a brand new building breaking ground. The biggest thing that does is take away a lot of parking where that building's going to go. That one is going to be open or scheduled. It finishes construction November of 26, and then we can move in and open for spring of 27. New residence hall that Chancellor Dooley mentioned, that one is currently, as of today, still on target to be done by April of 27. It takes about 2 months to move everything into a residence hall, up to 3 months. So the goal would be to have that open for fall of 27. We are really tied up against that timeline though. So if we have any issues, pretty much at all, it will likely delay that timeline. So there's just not a lot of cushion in that schedule. That's a $115 million residence hall that will have 780 beds. And then we have the Fletcher Hall addition, which also starts in March. A lot of that's utility work at first because we have to relocate a lot of utilities. And then as of now, we're showing April of 27, but probably a little past that would be my guess. So those are the active projects. So those are all currently on time with what I just told you, but that stuff changes quite frequently. So we try our best to get these done as much as possible, but some things are not in our control. We also have 2 additional projects that are in the programming phase. So we are currently programming a new parking structure at 8th and Houston Street. We're trying to fit 700 spaces in, probably be a 7-floor parking structure to make that happen. That's in program phase right now. We should start designing that in a few months. And then we have new dining hall is something that we need to get started as soon as we possibly can. So we've got a pretty good plan for that. We have some and it's through partnership with Airmark, but we have a really good plan. We've talked to UT System about that. We're waiting on some final approval, but that we're currently looking at placing that actually right next door to here where the natatorium is at McClellan Gym. So the natatorium and part of that parking lot. And that would be a 2-story dining hall, brand new. We currently have 363 seats in Crossroads. This would be over 750 seats, so it'd be a lot more capacity. And then, of course, we still have the food court in this building. But residence hall, parking, and dining are all 3 things that we have to expand all 3 of those things in order to increase enrollment to the goal that you've already heard about. So that's an update for capital projects.
The question.
March of 2025.
The question so that everybody
Yeah.
hears it.
Dr. O'Leary asked about 540 Macaulay's schedule, and it's still March of 25 as it has been for a while. And then we're currently expecting that to be completed. It's 2 phases. So the first phase is a year, and then the second phase is another year. Any other questions I didn't answer yet from earlier? Patton Chapel, I'll mention that. Yeah, thank you. I had that on my notes and totally forgot already. Unfortunately, we've had to make the decision to close Patton Chapel. It is not safe for occupancy. That is an old structure, 100 and something years old. We found out a few months ago that there's movement in the limestone, brick, and roof structure. We tried to do some work to shore that up while keeping it open, knowing that we have that building in the pipeline for capital maintenance. As we went through the design process to figure out what we could do from a safety perspective, the consultants and architects noticed even more movement in a short period of time. So they deemed the structure to be unsafe for occupancy. And this past week, we closed it and we notified a lot of people who had it booked over this next year that it would be closed. We did have to cancel about 29 weddings in that building, but that's better than limestone falling on a bride's head at the altar, I think. We don't know how long that'll take. We have some money already funded for that project for the roof as well as some of the building envelope, but it's not enough for what needs to be done. So that building is in the pipeline for capital maintenance. We're going to talk to the system office. They come here in a week or so for capital project planning. It's an annual meeting that we do with them. So we're going to talk then about pathways to get funding for Patton Chapel moved up a little bit so we can reopen that space. And then the only other thing I have an update for is budget. Where we are in the budget timeline, the governor's budget was released last night, and we're still digesting everything in there. But we do know that they funded the formula. The formula was funded about the same as they did last year. That's about where we expected for incremental growth in revenue. They included a 2.6% salary increase for higher education, so that was a little lower than I expected. Last 2 years have been, I think, 5% and 4%. And this year they're putting in 2.6. Now they don't fund the 100% of that 2.6. It comes out to about 65%. So we have to come up with the remainder to get to the 2.6. What else was in there? They did establish a $20 million research fund through the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. And that is geared toward partnering with higher ed for research projects. That's good. We don't know how that's going to work yet, but it could be an opportunity for us from a research, and it's going to be research projects that tie into the state's economic development portfolio. But we are currently doing work on this campus that ties into what they're doing through economic development statewide. So that could be an opportunity. They funded capital maintenance was not funded as high as it has been in the past several years. So we got to figure out what that means for us. We don't have all the breakdown yet because a lot of the stuff in the governor's budget's for UT systems. So then we have to go through and break it out by campus. But overall, I think it's good news. They didn't go backwards on funding, but it also didn't improve any from last year. So it's probably about, I would say, roughly status quo, maybe a little lower. But we'll look at that. We're going to get through that and get through where we think we'll be from a tuition environment, and then try to get to work on figuring out how we can invest as much money as possible into compensation. So that's something I've talked about for the past several months. We're not doing the traditional budget process this year where we take requests and prioritize and vet them and all those things. We just need to put everything we can into compensation. I believe that's the right thing to do, but it's also the best thing for us to do as an organization because we are behind on compensation, especially compared to the market. So we know that for faculty compensation, it's at least a $2 million investment that's needed, which we can never do over in 1 year, just to get faculty to what would be considered the market median. We still have a couple $1 million of staff compensation issues. We still have everything in between those, right? Because once we do some faculty stuff, that'll also create an issue in certain areas. We need to look at minimum pay for lecturers and other positions. So we're going to work through all that. We got to figure out now how much money we're going to have to invest. I really want to try to reallocate as much as we can within our current budget. So going through the budget line by line, where can we pull a little bit here or there to put all that into compensation? So that's something we're going to look at as well over the next couple of months. So for the next 2 months, we'll be doing a lot of analysis and exploration of where we can get to on the budget, and then we'll share that with campus. And that is all I have for you today. Answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor. I had 2 quick questions. Would you be able to explain a little bit further what you mean by the capital maintenance is not being funded? Maybe I don't understand exactly what that is. And then the second question, thinking about faculty compensation, are there conversations about alternative raise structures like, say, flat raises as opposed to percentage-based raises, which would then obviously help those who are on the low end of the pay scales who might need that assistance the most?
I'll do the last question first. I would say that everything's on the table, and that's certainly something we could look at to see what that would look like. One issue we do have, and we've talked in the past about having a lot of people on campus want merit, and I get it, and I do too, but like when we get a 2.6 pool, it's hard, and that's really hard to do merit unless you do all merit. We could do that. But yeah, I think any of those things are on the table for us to try to increase the competitiveness of our salaries. So I wouldn't say that we haven't said, no, we're not doing this or this. So right now it's a blank slate. What can we do to be as strategic as possible to catch up as fast as we can without creating more issues at the same time? For capital maintenance, so that every year the governor's budget includes funding for 2 capital components. One is capital outlay, and that's the one, like the new Fletcher Hall addition is capital outlay. And that's what they funded the most this year. Last year, they didn't fund any except for our business addition. There were no other higher education capital projects in the state other than TCAP for, the applied technology campuses across the state. So this year they did invest fairly heavily overall in higher education. I think it was 12 projects maybe. And for UT, because we got the only one last year, for UT, they did the chemistry building at Knoxville, business building at Martin, 4-H camp, and something else, maybe agriculture related. And then their other projects are other public universities. Then there's a capital maintenance component. That's the component this year that's lower than what it has been in the past few years. So they put out a pool. Let's say the governor includes $25 million of capital maintenance in his budget, and then that gets allocated rationally among the public universities based on their size. That component is smaller than it has been for the past couple of years. So we have to see how that affects our projects that we have in the capital maintenance pipeline.
What is capital maintenance, maybe?
So the way they do, yeah, so he asked, what is capital maintenance? We have to work within these constraints that are set by the state. So essentially, if you change the function of a building or move walls, they call that capital outlay. Used to, we could use capital maintenance funds to move walls as long as we didn't change the function, like several years ago, but they have gone away from that. I don't know why, because like we had one project where if we could have just moved the wall 1 foot, it would have saved us a lot of money, but that was not allowed. So we had to work around that and do the other things. And it's part of the constraints of the state. But that's really, capital maintenance money means we're renovating a building without changing the function or moving walls. So Brock is capital maintenance dollars because it's going to remain educational and we're not creating all new rooms within the building. So a lot of our capital maintenance dollars for the past several years have gone to building envelope. So roof, walls, windows, HVAC, those types of things, systems, mechanical, those types of projects are what we use capital maintenance dollars for primarily.
I'm just curious, when you say you want to prioritize getting salaries up to the median, is that referring to faculty and staff or just?
Faculty and staff. So we did a fair amount of work on staff compensation over the past couple of years. As we started raising minimum wage from, I think it was at $10 per hour, went up to 15 within 2 years. That's when we did a lot of studies around staff compensation and what the market median is, what compression is between all the different ranges. So we have a pretty good idea of that. We'll have to update that again at some point. But for faculty, we just recently did a faculty compensation study and benchmarked against not just our peers and aspirants, which is something we're required to look at. We also benchmarked against public universities in Tennessee and UT system. So we broadened it to make it a little more, to me, a little better of a benchmark. So that gives us an idea of what the market median is for every different type of faculty line. And we also have cost estimates to move everyone to the median. We also have an estimate to move everyone to 85% of the median as a starting point, right? So that may be what we look at is, all right, let's try to raise all boats on the tide, right? Get everybody up some amount and then do it again next year and again the year after that. We just have to figure out how long it's going to take to be able to invest that much money. Not yet. And she asked if the results of the study are available. Lori?
That through the budget and economic status
Yeah.
committee?
And we have one of those coming up. I'll let Lori talk about that.
Yes, so in years prior, we've partnered with the Academic Affairs Office and communicated the outcome of those results through the Budget and Economic Status Committee that's part of the Faculty Senate and engaged in any further review and questions that came from that process. So we plan to do the same. I think if that meeting's not planned for next week, it's the week prior.
Yeah, it's
So
scheduled this
coming
month.
soon.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We have the committee meeting is scheduled this month and we do plan to talk about the results from the compensation study.
The data or the product reports?
Either, both.
So we do collaborate with the representative committees based on requests for information and provide what's reasonable and what's permissible to release. associated with the data, because the data files behind that project are full data files with all demographics associated with faculty. So we certainly wouldn't release that type of information. But summary data, any kind of reports that provide snapshot of where we at from a compensation competitive positioning, we've always provided that. And I believe Vice Chancellor Goldberg had summary information included in the last budget presentation that was available also. So we'll continue to do that and respond to any questions that the committees or the faculty at large have.
Yeah, and some of the information, so there is a presentation currently on the UTC budget website. So under the Finance and Administration on the budget website for fiscal year 26, which is the next year's budget. I think well, I don't think the presentation is posted there, and it does include at least a couple of slides include some of the summary data from the reports we got from the compensation study. And I'll just mention this too, and this is, we've had requests, and since I've been here a little over 2 years, we've had some requests for employee data, faculty data, in particular compensation. We always encourage people, if they want something like that, to do a public records request. That way it can be vetted by general counsel, so we don't accidentally release something we're not supposed to, because it is sensitive data.
Okay, Gretchen Potts says that Dash has issues with compensation for student workers who are on multiple budget centers. How is this being addressed?
Do you know, Lori? So student Dash has an issue with student compensation when there's multiple accounts.
Hey,
So-
this is Gretchen. If you want me to explain.
And I'll start with this before Lori talks. There are lots of issues with Dash, right? And we know that. And it's part of this is the 4th ERP implementation I've done in my career. And honestly, I think this is the smoothest one I've ever dealt with. I've dealt with some really bad ones. So, and it doesn't mean there's not issues. There are lots of issues. Workflow is a big issue. UT system has been really good about communicating with us about what they're doing, what they're working on. Workflow is a huge priority because it affects everyone statewide at all the campuses. So getting through workflow issues. I do know that there have been issues with student workers in general, but I think they've fixed some of it. There's some workarounds, different things, but Lori can talk better about that probably.
Yeah, to my knowledge, any concerns or disruptions that have been raised regarding student workers, those have been resolved. I think some of the lessons learned have come at the system level after Dash implementation. There were some things that were perceived as barriers that were not anticipated prior to the January 6th rollout of the system. But it's my impression that they've worked through those. So there should be a solution. If we're speaking to students holding multiple roles on campus, that's a very common occurrence where they may serve as a student assistant in multiple departments. And we do have an opportunity to add those multiple assignments and compensate them in those ways. But if there's something in any department, just speaking broadly, that there's not a perceived resolution for that, please just contact Human Resources and let us know. There is a broad ticketing system for concerns, both at the campus level and the system level, and we work through those on a daily basis. But if there's anything compensation related, we want to know about those outside of the ticketing system. You can send it to us as a high alert so it doesn't get lost with maybe some workflow or other matters that we don't need to expedite as quickly. But we should be able to resolve any issues that are out there.
The ticketing system that we have for UTC's campus, the ELT notes that go out, I guess monthly now, the last one that went out in January, the only thing I included was a link to the Dash website. So you can find that in your email or you can Google it and find it. But under the UTC budget area, there's a Dash website that's got all things Dash, but also the button to click for the ticketing system. That is the #1 best way to submit anything Dash related, because we pull those together daily. We send stuff to the system. We fix things we can do ourselves here. That's the best way to do it. And so Dr. Potts, please either do a ticket or email Lori or both. Anything else? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. Next, we will invite Dr. Jacqueline Michael and group from her handbook committee team to talk to us about some potential changes to the handbook.
Thank you. Hi, I'm reporting back from the Handbook Committee. This is my colleague Carolyn Runyon, and there are a couple of Handbook members also in the audience as well. And we've been working hard this year on developing some proposals for voting procedures relating to tenure and promotion. In the handbook, that's 3.10.7 and 3.11.2. As you can see, if you take a look at the slide here that we've presented, our timeline, this committee has been working on this since the fall of 2023. We've had several different input periods on Canvas. And in fact, we've gotten to this place where we are today presenting these models to you through a comment that was given to us in November of 2023 on the Canvas pages related to expressing some confusion and wanting some clarification, particularly around the matters of abstentions and recusals and how those votes are understood. So what this committee has done has put together 3 models for you, and we're going to present them here today. We're announcing an input period, which will happen over the next 4 weeks or so. So Carolyn will talk about the models.
All right. Hi, everybody. So we have 3 models on the screen. I'll go about model A first. This is exactly what exists in handbook right now. So that's model A. I'm going to move to model B. All right. Model B has some additional language. Basically, abstain or vote no as part of your departmental RTP committee. You must anonymously provide an explanation for that vote, and recusals are permitted given conflicts of interest. And then model C is abstentions are not permitted in this model, and it's basically the same as model B. You would provide a brief explanation of your vote.
There was actually a difference. Sorry, a clarifying point. If we can go back to model B. In model B, it says strongly encouraged for providing explanation. And on model C, it says should, but you're saying that's the same and not a difference between.
The language is different. The language is different. We envision this as like a spectrum, beginning with the current language of the procedures, then moving to minor modifications, and then moving to more moderate modifications. Could you go to the next slide, please? So we've opened up a discussion section on Canvas for your qualitative feedback, and that'll be available until March the 17th. I've also created a quiz on Canvas that will capture quantitative feedback. We'd like as much input and data from faculty as possible so we can review the feedback and then come back to you as a committee to report on the March meeting and then perhaps call for a vote on these models at that time. So Carolyn and I, and there are some other folks on the committee that are in the audience. If people have questions or comments, I think we can take some, maybe particularly about the language of the proposals, but I really want to encourage folks to put your feedback back to us on Canvas so that others can see it. In Canvas, the feedback is anonymous or with attribution, it's your choice.
Yes, so from the Zoom, Tammy Garland asks, what does conflict of interest mean? She gives some examples, but I think she's asking, is there a definition of conflict of interest?
I think last year this committee tried to provide some more specificity on conflict of interest, and that language was a little bit too specific to pass legal counsel.
That's right. And these kind of questions and input we welcome, and we may revise these proposals given what we hear back from faculty. In the handbook, we're not going to be able to address every situation. Of course, we want there to be flexibility for colleges and departments to interpret them as the way that they'd like. But all of this feedback will be helpful for us as we refine these proposals as needed and then perhaps present them for a vote at the March meeting.
Any other questions? All right, folks, please do respond to those discussions and to the quiz so that we can gather your feedback before we come forward with a request for a vote in hopefully the March Senate meeting.
Yes, and I want to thank all the members of the committee for their hard work, not just this year, but also last academic year. The Handbook Committee were a small group of warriors, would you say? And I encourage you to think about signing up for Handbook for next academic year because it's super important for shared governance on our campus. Thank you.
This item is not on the agenda. However, I'm going to do it just because the provost and the chancellor both mentioned it. After the last faculty senate meeting, when we had quite a good amount of talk about the retention issues, we have worked, and the faculty senate is in the process of creating a faculty-led retention committee that will have faculty members from all of the colleges and the library and the honors college, and also we'll have a student member on it, and we'll have one representative from academic affairs and one from EMSA. So that committee will be announced and formed at the February 20th Faculty Senate meeting. Pending approval from that February 20th Faculty Senate group, it will start work maybe on the 21st. We're going to try to get that going right away, and it will run tandem with the committee that the provost mentioned that he's putting together through academic affairs as well. So just wanted to let you know that is coming. Is there anything else on here? All right, it's time for introduction of new faculty. Dean Rutledge, I believe you are up first. Make it green. We had a
Stand there.
microphone problem. We're fixing it.
We're going to hope this works. And if she'll just stand right there, maybe it'll work. And if you walk away, it might not. Okay. So the names that are listed there, you can see who joined us this year in the College of Health Education and Professional Studies. In the Department of Health and Human Performance, Dr. Ryan Zwart, who is a part of the SORT, the Sport Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Management Program, is an assistant professor. And also Professor Victoria Norwood is a lecturer in the Master of Public Health Program. In the School of Nursing, those individuals listed, Captain Garrett Salmon joined us as an assistant professor in the Nurse Anesthesia Doctor of Nurse Practice program. In addition, Professor Claire Allman is an assistant clinical professor, is an acute care nurse practitioner, board certified. And Megan Osland is an assistant professor of practice. And then finally, in the School of Education, Professor Stephanie Lewis, whose background, she's a lecturer, her background is literacy and English language arts. Dr. Yvette Stewart joined us as assistant professor and literacy director. Many of you have likely seen the tremendous emphasis on literacy, and we hired her away from the local school system. That was her position there, and she has been a great partner with us to work with them toward that. And then finally, Dr. Lauren Santorelli just joined us in January as an assistant professor, generalist, particularly focused on social studies.
Thank you. Dean Briggs Velasco is not able to be here today. So this is the list of the College of Arts and Sciences new faculty. For the music department, Brittany Rosado as a lecturer who also works in music therapy, and in military science, Zeke Maher, who is evidently coming in as the head. I believe that brings us to the Rollins College of Business. Is that one working now?
Hello. Sure. So we've got 3 new faculty members in the Rollins College of Business. First, we have John McKinney, who is a lecturer in the Department of Management. He has a BSBA and MBA from UTC, and he teaches courses in management and international management. Next, we have Zara Abdin. Zara is here. So, is John here, by the way? No. Zara is a lecturer in the Department of Data Analytics. She has a BS in Statistics from the University of Paradeniya. She also has an MS and PhD in Statistics from the Missouri University of Science and Technology, and she teaches courses in Data Analytics and Management Information Systems. And finally, we have Libby Fake. She's a lecturer in the Department of Marketing and Entrepreneurship. She has a bachelor's in management from Kennesaw State University and an MBA from Florida State University, and she teaches courses in marketing and personal selling. That's all.
Thank you, Dean. Appreciate it. Okay, well, this message is up a little bit. Now is the time for faculty concerns. Do we have any faculty concerns either out in the Zoom or here in the room that you would like questions or answers or thoughts? Over here? Thanks. Vice Chancellor Blackman, we appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would love to hear what administrative responses or conversations around recent executive orders are looking like. Obviously, this is a pretty intense time, and I know that a lot of faculty are worried about this, not just because of funding questions, but also because of restrictions on what we are able to teach, what we're able to say, et cetera, et cetera. I'm wondering if the administration can speak to that a little bit, and then also, I know that there are several legislative items at the state level that are also being considered, and I would love to hear more about how we are anticipating those affecting UTC.
Chancellor, would you like to go first?
Thanks very much.
And do you mind coming up front so they can see you? He's got one.
Yeah, and I was going to say that. I also asked Yusuf, our general counsel for the university, to join us. He's on Zoom, so he can step in as well. To your point about the executive orders, it's a really fluid situation. It's almost a little bit like whiplash. So executive orders will come out, and then, for example, the latest thing with NIH, that's now an injunction. So nothing's changed as of now because of an injunction that was filed last night about changing the overhead for NIH-funded grants. What I can say is the system is monitoring all the executive orders very closely. We are meeting regularly to talk about them at a system level since they all impact the campuses equally, except in some varying degree of scope. And we're trying to have a collective system response to it, right? So that we're not each campus doing their own thing. If you've got a specific question about a specific executive order, Yusuf can probably address that question if you have that. But let me follow up quickly. Your second piece was, what was the second part of your question? Oh, the legislative. Okay, 1,000 bills were dropped at the legislature last week. 1,000 bills. Those are a lot of bills. Typically, relative to that 1,000, only a handful make it through committee. So while you can see what all the bills were that proposed, I would say right now, it's a sit back and wait, because most of those bills are never going to make it out of committee, even though some of them, you read them and you go, wow. Carrie Whitworth, who is our legislative liaison, last week started plowing through those 1,000 bills. We will have conversations with her about which ones are most likely to move out of committee and go to the floor for a vote. And we're monitoring that very closely as well. But all I can say is we're paying super close attention to this. And in the note that I sent out to faculty last week to campus, one thing, and we've had this conversation at the chancellor's level, and Randy Boyd, we're committed to academic freedom and the policy that we reference there. We will fight for that. And right now, there's really nothing coming out that would suggest that's necessarily an issue, except for some stop work orders around some levels of research that we don't have any impact on this campus right now around those stop work orders. Other campuses are having more challenges and issues with that. But there's not a lot more to say. Yusuf, you're there. I don't know if you want to weigh in beyond that, not to put you on the spot, but since you're here, I'm going to put you on the spot.
That's fine. I just start off and encourage anybody have any questions to feel free
We
to
can't
reach
hear you
out
for
to
some
me.
reason.
Can you hear me?
So I can hear you online. We just can't hear you here. So there's probably no way to do a speaker here.
Ray, is there any way for us to hear a speaker from online? You're calling me. I got it.
Can I ask in the meantime a follow-up, a specific question as you suggested?
Yeah, sure.
It's been at least said, some colleagues have brought up concerns around scholarships for students that are related to questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion that are now no longer visible and may have disappeared altogether. It would be great to hear where those stand and what we're doing around that issue.
Yeah, so Yusuf, you can shake your head or not, whether I get this right, and then maybe you can tap. Or you want to try again, Yusuf?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Okay, okay. Did you hear that last question?
I'd help if you could repeat it, please.
The question, and correct me if I get this wrong, but the question is, what are we doing around scholarships that focus specifically on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So targeted scholarships. And you and I had this conversation yesterday. So an update on where that is.
Sure. Last summer, the Supreme Court issued a ruling in a lawsuit that was brought against North Carolina and Harvard University over their admissions practices, particularly their use of race as a consideration in deciding who's admitted. The Supreme Court ruled that race cannot be considered in any way for admissions decisions, and our Tennessee Attorney General's office has also advised that same principle applies to our scholarship grants and agreements. So since the summer of 2024, we've been reviewing our scholarship agreements to make sure they align with the Supreme Court ruling. But essentially, we are already prohibited by federal law from making decisions on admissions and scholarships based on race or sex or other protected classes. The issue that we are trying to address are scholarship agreements that include what they call preferences, where there's a preference stated by a donor, for example, for the scholarship to be awarded to someone who's in a particular protected class. Those sorts of preferences are now considered to be prohibited. So we are discussing those particular scholarship agreements with those preferences with the donors and making the necessary revisions to them. That's an ongoing process, but at the end of the day, our admissions processes, I think, were already compliant because we were already ensuring that we're not making decisions based on prohibited reasons. So I don't anticipate much change in terms of how we dole out scholarships because we have been basically doing what the law has required. So the Supreme Court decision may have affected other universities that maybe applied the preferences a little bit more aggressively than the scholarship commissions have here at the university.
General guidance. Yeah, Yusuf, you want to just provide some general guidance on the executive orders in terms of our position on some of those at the system level?
Sure. So there are two main executive orders that were issued that would have had the most impact on the university. One was the federal funding freeze, which was a directive that was issued by the Office of Personnel Management, I believe. That order was prohibited or stopped or stayed by a court last week under a temporary restraining order. After the court ruled, the federal agency rescinded that order, but there are still some issues and allegations that the administration is still enforcing parts of that order. So that is still an ongoing litigation controversy. So we expect the court in that case to have a hearing later this month to provide a more definitive ruling on whether or not or what parameters would be proper for federal funding to be frozen. But for now, there is no freeze in place. And just stay tuned on that. We'll certainly keep every campus updated on any changes in the litigation on that. And then the other order that I'm sure you've heard about is the broad order for any federal agencies that have grants that what they consider to be DEI activities. Those should all be prohibited or stopped immediately. That order is also under a temporary restraining order by a court. And any decisions that the federal agencies make while that stay is in place cannot be based on that order. So if, for example, if a federal agency wants to stop funding a particular grant, they cannot base that decision on the executive order that is trying to target DEI related activities. So for now, the two major executive orders that we have been monitoring are currently on hold. We expect more definitive rulings later this month on both. And so it's a pretty fluid situation. I'd say that while those orders are on stay, there are some universities, including some of our campuses in the UT system, that are still getting stop work orders. If you receive a stop work order for a grant that you're working on, please immediately notify me or the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs so we can take a look at it and see what, if anything, we need to do to comply with that stop work order. As far as I know, and I don't know if Meredith is on the call here, but I think we've only received one stop work order for a particular grant at UTC. And that order pertained to activities that our faculty were not actually doing. So it didn't really have any impact on what our faculty were doing under that grant. We're, again, continuing to monitor. It changes, seems day to day on what's happening. We'll try to get information out to the campus as soon as we have more guidance and clarity on what's going to happen. The other order that you may have heard about that recently was issued, I think last Friday, was a directive from the National Institutes of Health to change the reimbursement rate for indirect costs for any NIH grants. That order is also on a stay under a temporary restraining order by a court that was issued yesterday, and another one was issued this morning, which applies nationwide. We have a few NIH grants, so it would have minimal impact on the university if it were to be implemented, but we expect that order to be resolved sooner than later. I think there's already hearings scheduled for later this week to decide whether or not that order should be rescinded completely or modified in some way. So we'll certainly update the campus on that as well. Just one last point I want to make with respect to the DEA or DEI order I mentioned a few minutes ago. There is no clear definition as to what activities they consider to be DEI activities. And that is part of the issue that a lot of universities are struggling with, because they're not really sure what activities would actually be prohibited by it. We are in anticipation of receiving perhaps some stop work orders in the future on any grants that we may have that could be considered performing DEI activities. We're just currently, my office, along with the Office of Research, are going through all the grants that we have. And if we identify any that we have questions about, we'll be reaching out to the faculty working on those grants to get clarity on what kind of work we're doing. But that's just more of a proactive measure. It's not an indication that we're going to be shutting down or asking any faculty per se to stop working on any grants. We're just trying to figure out what we're doing in just anticipation of some future from orders from the federal agencies.
Yusuf, we have a couple of questions in the chat. You may be able to see them as well, but a couple of them are related to how this may affect research being done by faculty that's DEI related, and how it maybe affect diversity courses that we actually offer at this time on the campus.
With respect to the grants, we are reviewing our federal grants that have activities that could potentially be considered DEI activities. So for those, we'll certainly be in touch with the faculty working on those grants if we identify any that may fall under that order. As far as our courses that we teach that may consider to be related to DEI themes or whatever under our academic freedom policy and our current laws, there shouldn't be no impact on our ability to teach those subjects.
Dr. Garland, your hand is up. Do you want to further that question?
I do. Yusuf, last week, the University of North Carolina system, they basically eliminated the requirement to take general education DEI courses from their curriculum across the state. There is also mention that that programs, they haven't done it yet, but they are looking at eliminating requirements from programs. What is the talks within the UT system and the state of Tennessee as a whole, because we are very similar in our approach oftentimes? So what are we doing and how do we address that?
That would potentially be an issue with respect to any new state legislation. And we are, as Robert mentioned, monitoring the new bills that were just filed last week. There's a lot to go through. Our operational mode, usually with the bills, is that we only really communicate to the campus when we feel like a bill will be actually making it through and become a law. So I would encourage those who go online and look at the bills not to panic if they see something that's concerning to them. Our government relations team is working really hard to go through those bills and work with sponsors of those bills if they have some provisions or impacts that might be adverse to the university. So for now, I'm not aware of any bills that would address or prohibit the specific type of courses that that you mentioned, but certainly we'll keep everybody posted if something does come down the pipe.
Joni?
Thanks. Yusuf, this is Joni Sambarat. I don't get grants for my research, but I do a lot of DEI research. I want to clarify my question that I asked in the chat. Is it problematic for me to use UTC resources to do research in DEI? Because a lot of my research, it's accounting research, but it explores DEI topics. If it comes down that the injunction is lifted, I just want to be clear that I'm not violating any executive orders if I use UTC resources to do, for example, exploring recruiting underrepresented students to accounting. If I'm doing research in that area, I don't want to violate the executive order. Do you see where I'm going with this?
No, I understand it. And the executive orders that have been issued to date would not impact your ability to use university resources, do your personal research. Again, I think if there's going to be any legislation in that area, it would be from the state. But I think that would probably fall under our academic freedom umbrella. I'm sorry?
I said it's exhausting, all of this, but that's just my
No,
personal.
I understand. It's a very fluid environment right now. We're doing our best to stay on top of it. And certainly if that is something that is a subject of any bills that come from the state legislature this session, we will be addressing it and hopefully working to minimize any impacts it may have on us.
Thank you.
I have a question from email that they would ask anonymously, which is the DEI order seems to also create a conflict with following the ADA in some situations. And is the university or the system already looking at the impact on, should the order make it through, on what the impact on our ADA compliance and our outreach to disabled students and faculty members would be?
The DEI related executive order specifically carved out any sort of activities that support veterans and disabled persons. So I do not expect any of the executive orders to have any impact on our ADA compliance or activities.
Dr. Garland?
Last one, I promise. I've talked with several faculty members, and they're experiencing a lot of fear regarding the current administration's approach to the Department of Education, specifically them being targeted for attending a DEI conference or DEI training years previously. It would probably be good to talk about limit people's fears and clarify what the university is doing to protect people, and that's not likely to happen because people are really nervous.
Tammy, I'm not really sure. What is the concern exactly?
People in the Department of Education got fired for attending a DEI training in 2019. And so that they were being targeted after the fact for something that they were instructed to do. And we have adopted a lot of initiatives over the years, and people have been asking me what's going to happen if they attend a conference or a presentation or a lecture, or even like Joni's doing, DEI research, or that's considered DEI. I think the university and the system may need to address some of these issues because people are really starting to become afraid.
No, I understand. Let me answer it this way. So currently there are no laws that would prohibit our faculty or staff from attending conferences like that. If a law is issued that would, in that area, would come from the state legislature, we'll see. There's, as far as I know, no bills to that effect that have been filed, but we'll wait and see after the review by the government relations team is completed. Obviously, I can't predict the future, but I find it very unlikely that there would be any kind of new law that would retroactively punish any of our employees for having engaged in those sorts of activities or going to conferences like that in the past. I think that would be, from a practical standpoint, very difficult to even enforce, but I think there would be some constitutional problems with such a law as well. But if someone has more specific concerns about a specific conference or upcoming conferences that they're going to, I've already gotten a few inquiries that I'm looking into about some programs that we're doing this summer that could be construed as DEI related, and trying to navigate how best to continue with those sorts of conferences or programs that we have on campus. In terms of our employees going to conferences held at other universities, again, currently I'm not aware of anything that would impact that.
Yusuf, we've got one more question in the chat about what kind of support is the university providing to non-U.S. citizen students during some really, what did it say? It's called a time of questionable acceptance.
All of our students receive the same level of support. That's a difficult question to answer. I'm happy to speak offline if anybody has any more specific questions on that topic.
Actually, also Takeo Suzuki has posted to the chat that he's willing to talk to anyone who has questions. He is actually meeting with international students right now. Not right this second, but coming up, and he's willing to talk to anyone as well. So if you have additional questions, Yusuf has said you can talk to him. Takeo has said you can talk to him. I'm sure the rest of the administration is glad to hear about our concerns.
And I just want to reiterate one more thing. Keep doing what you're doing in terms of your research, unless you receive a stop work order. And if you receive a stop work order, then please contact Yusuf and we'll navigate that. But right now, just continue doing what you're doing with respect to your research on campus, what you're doing in teaching your classes. There's no change. So.
Any other faculty concerns at this time? Nothing else in the chat? Thank you all for being here, whether you were here via Zoom or whether you were here in the lovely University Center auditorium. We do have cookies left. Come on down, even if you're in your office somewhere. If the rain has quit, come on down and get a cookie. We appreciate everybody being here. Thanks for everything. And we had a slide and then we turned it off. If you have concerns that you want brought up in Senate, please address your senators or any member of the executive committee of the Faculty Senate. Unless anything else, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.